So you don't take for granted that I walk into a postdoc. I mean, I finished my PhD about 2 years ago, and I have been in very low places in terms of trying to figure out what's next.
What's next?
Or that is actually a response to an environment that creates the need to pose as something that you are not.
You have just opened up my mind to something else. Wait, I need you to repeat that again.
It is a path of glory when we finish, but it's a path of sacrifice and isolation. And so it's sweet sometimes. It's not for different reasons and under different circumstances, but I think that we are more than capable.
Yeah. Hello everyone, welcome to Academia Unplugged, a platform where real scholars get to tell their real stories, and also a platform where we get to meet our real scholars that tell their real stories. If you're a new subscriber or if you are watching us for the first time, don't forget to click that subscribe button, comment, like, and share. Don't be scared to comment. We are very friendly. And if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. Thank you for tuning in once again. And thank you very much for liking and for watching last week's video. And if you haven't, I will link it down below. Sit back, grab your tea, grab your popcorn, and enjoy today's segment. So today, on the platform, we've got Dr. Ernest Sewordor, who is a global urban historian of the 19th and 20th century Africa, and you specialized on Ghana.
That's correct.
Which was previously named the Gold Coast.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, I come to the second part of this wonderful conversation that we're having. And you grew up in Ghana, you have done your research, you've gotten your PhD, you've seen the struggles, you've done everything. And then what now? What is a postdoc? What entails a postdoc?
So semantically, if we break it down, there's a post and there's a doc, right?
Right.
Post is after something, right? And the doc is doctorate. I don't have to educate people. I think people know. So the moment that you are awarded after hard work, a doctorate, a PhD, everything else, whether you stay in academy or go out, is a postdoc.
Is postdoc.
But we tend to focus, when we use the label postdoc,
to
on
academia.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The choice or people who remain in the academy.
Yeah.
It entails a whole lot of things, depending on what part of the world you find yourself. Because strictly speaking, we sit here in Europe. It's the postdoc life is not the same as the postdoc life in North America. The postdoc life pretty much doesn't exist in, say, Ghana, because then you'd move on to maybe some fellowships. I think in the recent past it's become a thing, but you then transition to become a junior lecturer, and then you work your way out
to professorship.
Exactly. But to double back to the point about where you find yourself and the structures that operate, is to say that in the German-speaking parts of Switzerland, if you defend your dissertation and you pass, you have commitment. You have to publish. So you have that publishing responsibility. And until you do that, your name is written in a very bizarre way as a doctor designate.
Insane.
With your name. I hope...
So you cannot call yourself doctor until you publish.
You can call yourself doctor designate.
Intense.
And you can be prosecuted if you don't write your name as designate. So I hope when you put my name on the internet,
it will be designate.
Designate until I publish, and we can change it. So that is one big requirement. And I think...
Intense.
it beholds on a PhD candidate to educate oneself.
Yeah.
To know that this is a thing, so that if you have very flowery imagination of, I'm going to become professor, assistant professor in 2 years, then you'd have to calculate that publication requirement.
Yeah.
And in the University of Basel, which is where I earned my PhD and therefore what I know, you need to earn a certain grade. So if you end below that grade, I can't remember exactly.
Isn't 6 a cum laude or summa cum laude or something like that?
Yeah, close. I mean,
or maybe it's faculty dependent.
5.6-ish.
Right.
You are in the summa cum laude.
And it's not the easiest thing to get a 5.
It's not.
Yeah.
Anyway, point being that you need to be aware and informed, which is not always easy, and not to throw in a cheap card, but most of us, you and I, coming from English-speaking academic contexts and countries, this is not always the easiest and the most easily available.
Direct,
But it buttresses the point regardless that we are in a digital age. We can Google Translate stuff. So I think it's too convenient an excuse to say that, it's German and our brain stopped working. We have the resources to be able to achieve and unlock information to inform ourselves. But speaking from the Department of Social Sciences, there are very helpful structures that help us, or that enable us to understand the landscape.
Right.
But we have to always knock on doors to be informed. So there are 3 ways that you can check this publication requirement, and one, again, ought to be informed about these decisions.
Right.
Because if your dream is not Basel, it's not a German-speaking part of Switzerland, but to go elsewhere, you don't have your certificate. You only get a provisional certification that you have. It's a proof that you have earned a PhD, but it's not a certificate of your PhD. So if you have to leave and go back to Tanzania, Burkina Faso, whatnot, those institutions, as far as I know, will require the certificate proper and not a designate certificate.
That is insane. Like, it blows my mind how much work goes into PhD and postdoctoral. How do you establish yourself without the certificate you've worked for 4 years or plus? Some people do it for 10 years. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. So it depends on who reality or experience we are talking about, because a postdoc is not a given to walk into. Assuming you want to stay in Switzerland as an academic, which is a very small industry, you always need to prove that you have a job that translates into your permit. So it's not the same for an EU citizen. Like, the dynamics are different, and I think it's absolutely important to lay these things out. So again, being informed is important, both as a personal or individual responsibility and as an institutional responsibility towards its PhDs, University of Basel towards its PhDs. And then within this bracket of being informed from both sides, one ought to design and plan a pathway. So you don't take for granted that I walk into a postdoc. I mean, I finished my PhD about 2 years ago, and I have been in very low places in terms of trying to figure out what's next. Right. And in my case, I have decided to stay in Switzerland. I want to stay in Switzerland. It comes with very specific challenges. And I should say at this point, very big thank you to my supervisors, my first and second, who always found a way, again, from their position as professors with stability and the ability to create small employment here and there for me to stay afloat. Right.
That's really nice.
Yeah. And it's rare.
It's very rare, especially on this side of the world.
Exactly. Until a few months ago, I did not know what the next 3 months was going to look like.
Insane.
So, point being that the postdoc can be very precarious, but it can also be a window of opportunity if you'd sort of see the road and plan for the road quite well enough. Because funding, for one, right? So there are different ways to get into the university and to sustain your life before you get a permanent job. And the funding structure, particularly in Switzerland, is very narrow through government-funded, the SNSF. And you need to inform yourself, right? And funding can easily be elusive when you get in, particularly to an SNF-sponsored project, which covers you for 4 years and you don't have to hustle and you forget.
It's comfortable.
It is. So it's likely that you'd forget. You then not have a mobility experience, which is crucial for the next or one of the next options that are available, right? The postdoc mobility, which is sponsored by the SNF, and it's a requirement to demonstrate having moved and
collaboration.
Having experiences depending on your field. And I suppose collaboration is a big thing in the sciences, right? So one ought to inform themselves. And I think the structures to also help people to be informed ought to be put in place.
Because I think it's one thing to be informed, but also it's another thing to actually find the information. And I remember in our previous episode, we touched on this matter where, like you said, things are in German, but of course there's Google Translate. You can translate that. It's not so clear cut, Some of the things that we tend to experience, you hear from someone else. And I guess this is where like networking and collaboration comes in. If I know that Ernest is there and I can just pick up the phone and call him and be like, hey, I'm struggling with funding or mobility, where do I go? And then you'll be like, oh yeah, maybe try this agency or that person if you're not SNSF funded, or try this and this and this. And this is how we, especially I think for non-German speakers, information turns to go around. And I think it's very valuable what you're saying, that educate yourself, have a clear vision, have a clear path. And of course, things are not going to go the way that you want it to go. For example, it's also for me, like, I think I'm one of the people you've put in the category of fantasizing about a good academic life. Although, I have encountered some struggles along the way, but I always think, okay, if something is meant to happen, it will happen. But if something is meant to happen, it will happen, but inform yourself. I wouldn't have thought that someone after a PhD would struggle to find their feet and not know, in the next 3 months, what am I going to do? And I guess that's the void that you feel during your post doc. And how did you navigate that? Did you have some form of supporting structures? You are far from home. It's not every day that you pick up the phone and call mom or, someone who is family or friends and be like, yeah, I'm struggling. My friends are like, bro, you're in Switzerland. So have you had some supportive?
Yeah, and I think this is an important question because it allows this conversation to become a full circle, not just the emphasis on our academic pursuit, but also to expand beyond that and to acknowledge that we are individuals pursuing an individual dream because it ends up on our CVs. But to also understand that we are connected to an environment which involves people that sometimes we have to manage. And it involves circumstances that sometimes we bottle up and just go along. And I do like that you mentioned, the worth and the wealth of networking. Not necessarily to get a first notification of that opportunity that they would even publicize, but to sort of anchor oneself within productive, supportive systems.
Right.
because there is a deeply psychological part of this pursuit. And I am yet to find any PhD student whose family understand what they do. Right? They just know that you're doing a PhD somewhere in some country where life is kind of chill.
Well,
you know?
Yeah.
But I think I'd like to situate this question beyond the individual, because all too often the PhD is seen as an individual pursuit, but I think we are connected to a lot of forces that discredit that way of thinking, or that shows the limits of that way of thinking. Because, I mean, for those of us not from Switzerland, and I'm thinking about Africans, we come here through different family backgrounds. So I am the last of my mom's children. I therefore culturally don't have certain obligations. I don't have a set of younger siblings to take care of. That is a relief. I am not a husband. That is a relief, right? Because in as much as we situate ourselves as individuals, there are all these networks that we can't pretend do not exist, and they exist in different constellations for different people.
Yeah.
I feel my weight is quite light because of some of these entanglements that I don't have. But of course, I have connections with my mother, my grandmother, friends at home, who, depending on how deeply we allow into our lives and how much information we avail, we are able to manage their expectation of your presence here.
Yeah.
Because they don't always interpret you being here as on a journey to earn a PhD or to find a life after a PhD. But they see you as like a relative, a brother, an older brother, a younger brother, you know, where they want to have a chat with and tell you about their problems. You might not be in the mental space for that, but they do not see that, which is okay. Because again, we are more than academics, crafting ourselves towards the highest degree. We are humans connected to our environment, which most often involves other human beings. But then there are all these expectations that we have to deal with. Some are easy to negotiate, others are very, very difficult to negotiate. And I mean, people come to Europe through, as you rightly said, different ways. You may have taken a loan from the bank, so you can't save. So when your permit expires and you have to show your bank account as evidence that you won't become a burden to Switzerland, it is not possible. So just to sort of open the conversation up a bit and to then think from that point how to manage this, I can only speak of my personal experiences. Course, and I think I have been very fortunate both from my outlook on life, watching my mom raise me and my siblings pretty much on her own. The biggest lesson was independence. So when I knew, roughly from about 10 years ago, that I wanted to go out of Ghana to pursue a higher degree and probably establish a life there, I made sure that I was saving up to make this not just a dream, but to work out. So through that, I was able to manage a lot of my dependency on other people. So for the first few years, I would go home to Ghana and not even my mother knew that I was coming. It might sound arrogant, but I was like, I don't owe anybody information.
Insane.
I would turn up. If you love me, you come and hug me. And we can deal with the emotions later that you were unhappy that I didn't inform you.
You didn't tell me,
But this is how, not private, maybe a bit private, but this is how I try to present my independence. And I always say that if people know you and they look out for your interest, this shouldn't be a problem. But again, I can afford to do this. As the last child, I always say nobody misses me at home. I'm a nuisance. So, you know, then it has a financial implication that when I came to Switzerland, I had a relatively comfortable life. I mean, I did not have to live under my expenses, but I wasn't earning anything insanely rich. After the PhD, things got even more comfortable that for the first time I could save. And people would not believe this because they don't understand. And I talk to people, I'm like, you get paid on a certain date of the month. Things work so it won't be delayed. You can't go and tell your landlord stories as I can tell my landlord stories.
Back home. Exactly. You're like, no,
health insurance
is
compulsory. It is
compulsory. You cannot stay here without health insurance.
But these are things that even for my closest relations, I tell them they understand what I am saying, but they can't relate. And that can be frustrating because tomorrow there would be a list of things people want. And you just had that conversation yesterday and you'd have to sort of refresh the page. So it takes a lot of patience for oneself and towards other people. And hopefully that you will curate a surrounding of people and circumstances that allows them to also demonstrate that understanding because it's crucial. Otherwise it becomes very heavy. And so on. And I think another thing has to do with how much we tend as people not originating from Switzerland, tend to be willing to connect to Switzerland. Because I found in a lot of experiences that people from Africa who were doing their PhD loved to stay in the bubble of familiarity. And so if you want to survive as a postdoc, that to a certain degree is not an easy thing because Switzerland is not very famous for being so warm. But it is worthwhile. Because in my experience, if people become friends with you, with a Swiss upbringing, it means something. You can call on them in the most difficult moments. And sometimes we assume that you can find it in a Ghanaian community. It's not always the case. Because people, having grown up here, can just give you information that can be transformative. So again, to networking and not seeing oneself as an isolated situation, but to understand the connections both at home and here, and to actively and positively, as much as possible, nurture and curate that. I think that's quite fundamental.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true. And how do you, as a postdoc or someone who has just finished their PhD, choose? So you said you were grateful to your supervisors who gave you an opportunity or opportunities to remain in Switzerland and have small things that you could do here and there. Did you ever consider going to industry, for example, like as an urban planner or as not an anthropologist, as an urban planner or infrastructure development planner or something along those lines? Did you always have your vision towards academia?
No.
Okay.
That's a short answer. And let me explain.
Okay.
Because 10 years ago, if you ask me where I will be going, I would probably tell you I'll become a teacher. Because I come from a family of teachers.
Okay.
And during my vacations, I would teach in my grandmother's school, for instance. And it was effortless for me. So, I kind of leaned towards that. But 10 years ago in 2014, when I finished my MA and did my little long essay, we call it, but thesis, on my little village, Abokobi, I began to see that possibility as a research agenda unfolding. And I was like, okay, I would do my national service, which is a 1-year mandatory service, public service to the state.
So just like the Swiss military service.
Exactly.
Right.
In the history department, because I had grown to like history. which was nothing that I did in my previous level of education. I did business.
Oh, okay.
So I had moved very swiftly to a different discipline. I had grown some level of interest, and through connections within the department, they telling me that, what's next, having these conversations, I decided to do a master's, understanding full well that it's a bridge and not an end in itself, because then you'd have to do a PhD. So that is how come I began to follow this path and develop my interest in urban history. So strictly speaking, I belong and identify as an urban historian than, say, a planner.
All right.
I do the history of these things, not those
not
things
the
themselves.
Actual, right, okay.
But to then direct my response to your very clear question, yes, I had considered, even, in the last year of my PhD, doing something other than being in the academy.
Right.
And I still hold that possibility dear to my heart. But I think that having decided I want to stay in Switzerland, I need to develop certain competence to be able to make those transitions.
Of course,
One very big obvious thing is the language. Right? So, I would have to hold on to, I have to keep plugging into the academy while I explore other paths. And I should be grateful for the possibility in terms of workshop opportunities in the Department of Social Sciences that help you think beyond the academy. And one of the big flags that was raised, or as a premise, was that we tend to be configured within the academy that you must stay in the academy. If you don't, you are a failure. So it doesn't even appear on your imaginative horizon
to branch into industry,
to think that you have acquired a lot of things in the academy that can be applied elsewhere. Right. So it's a slow process for me, but it's a process that is, or it's a consideration that is on the table. And I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I would totally love to consult on the history for documentary makers, for instance. Something creative that can benefit from the background that I have.
That you have.
We could do research, right? And so forth. So yes, I have considered something non-academic, but that relies on my academic background.
Okay, that's interesting. And I always find it also quite bizarre, the amount of money that we as academics earn, for lack of a better term, as compared to people that are not academics. And I'm sure someone with your set of accolades and accomplishments would, in industry, earn possibly much more than you would currently in academia. And I guess that's some of the realities that we have to face right now. And as you have evolved, so I know you are about to start your postdoctoral research activities. Have you, or did you encounter a certain level of imposter syndrome? And I know last week we had Dr. Temi, who said she had no imposter syndrome, and she was just like, no, I have worked hard for this. And it was such an interesting dynamic for me to realize that, and because for me, imposter syndrome is something universal. It's something everybody faces, especially when you are in academia or doing research. Say maybe for you, did you encounter that, say, hoop? And if so, if not, do you still face it even after attaining your PhD?
Yes.
Right.
The short answer I'd explain. I agree with your formulation, and I have actually thought hard and long about this.
Yeah.
Because I think there are two dynamics at play.
Yeah.
There is the straightforward understanding of imposter syndrome that one puts him or herself or themselves out as something they are not. But that's not all. That is actually a response to an environment that creates the need to pose as something that you are not.
You have just opened up my mind to something else. Wait, I need you to repeat that again. What did you say?
So I think our common understanding of imposter syndrome focuses on the symptom,
right, and
of the real thing at play.
I need you to write this down somewhere and sell it. I don't know for how much.
The Unpluggers, I hope, would subscribe to this
please
material fast.
This is mind-blowing.
And why do I say that? Let me use myself as an example, as the first person from Ghana, a black person, a black man, in the urban studies PhD program.
In Basel,
which is relatively young, I should say, right?
Yeah.
But having struggled during my life in Ghana and made it to this point, the stakes naturally are high.
Yeah.
And whether I like it or not, I become an ambassador. It's probably unspoken, but it exists. So it's there in my mind whether I like it or not. And to the extent to which I care about it, I would respond to it, sometimes in very subtle ways, right? I mean, this is a German-speaking context, so, you know, people might not be very impressed with how you speak English. People would expect that you speak good English than them because you come from an English-speaking context or country, right? And so the way that we in Ghana would say locally acquired foreign accent, begin to present yourself, begin to talk. It might be subtle, but it's a response.
Right.
So we don't have to sit down and design a strategy to pose in a certain way to call it imposter syndrome. But in as far as we move from one context to the other, we will adapt. And I think as a term which is often presented in a problematic way, it becomes less so, and I see it as adapting. But once we register it, first of all, consciously, and know and pursue that pose, which we know is not true, but we sustain it, that is where it becomes a problem. As far as I see it. So basically, to think about the environment and how we respond constantly, because it changes, about this environment, I think it comes from a place of feeling a lack in ourselves, in our role, in our responsibility, in our position within that new environment.
Yeah.
And so we make up for that lack. But how we make up for that lack, I think, is where we can unpack what we might call imposter syndrome. And I do very much understand what in other interviews have been described as me and imposter syndrome. We don't know each other.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's amazing.
Because that is a very healthy standpoint.
To
Begin to sense, understand, and process one's response.
And to have a sense of self, positionality.
Right.
Crazy.
Confidence.
Yeah.
And so if you look back, it should inspire not the deficiency, but the capacity and the ability.
Preach.
Right? And I think that is a strength.
Yeah.
But it's an individual thing, right? Which illustrate one's strength of mind in this environment. I mean, you could always tell yourself, and affirmation, self-affirmation, I am here. My education is being paid for the highest degree in Switzerland.
That's incredible.
How many Swiss people do want or have PhDs?
Yeah.
So one need to be proud of that accomplishment, of course, in a healthy way.
Yeah.
To be able to not process an environment that imposes a syndrome that requires a posture that is not true. Because how long can you sustain the act? it will fall apart quite easily.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of a quotation by the Jamaican nationalist and political activist Marcus Garvey, who says that without self-confidence, we are twice defeated in the race of life.
Crazy.
With confidence on the other side, you have already won even before you started.
Yeah. At least halfway there.
Yes.
Wow. I think I'm going to listen to this over and over and over and over again. And I hope that our viewers or listeners also, that is very... I wish you could write this down somewhere so that someone could read it over and over again. That is such a beautiful way of looking at it and, dealing with imposter syndrome. Because as in academia or as academics, we really, you look at yourself, we face so much rejection, be it for papers, publications, grants, funding, whatever. It's always a no. And you always have to prove yourself. And for sure, at some point, you will ask yourself, do I even, what does this mean? Am I even good enough? But of course, there are forces beyond our understanding that, merit these decisions or make the people that make these decisions make them. My English is running away. To which I must actually applaud you. You have such good vocabulary. There's no way to pinpoint, but you have such, I like how you speak.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. And my two final questions is one about funding and the second one about rejection. So funding, how did you navigate funding? Say, let me take you back to during your PhD days. If you had to go to the field, for example, and I can assume you had to go to Ghana and do some data collection there, or perhaps you maybe you did it online, I'm not sure. But if you did, or if you had to go to conferences, was your project funded for that? Or did you have to get external funding? And if you were rejected for funding, how did you, say, deal with that sort of aspect?
Right. So I think there are two things to preface my response.
Yeah.
First being that I was lucky enough to have been employed on a completely funded project.
Good.
So then the question of funding for fieldwork kind of did not apply.
Right.
During my PhD.
Yep.
But I can dip into experiences after my PhD
postdoc,
to respond to this question.
Yep.
The second preface is that if Switzerland, which I believe, is a well-to-do country, it's a rich country, then there's money. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to find it.
Somehow.
And there are a lot of opportunities of funding windows to get these.
Yeah.
But that depends on which part of the university you belong to.
True.
As I have said previously, I'm in the social sciences. There are certain, amounts that I can access just by being a member of that department.
Yeah.
So doubles back to being informed.
Yeah.
Asking questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because people have gone ahead of you and you don't have to reinvent the whole time.
Yeah.
Or sulk in that non-obvious, that doors for funding are not obvious, just ask. And I think very hard-working people in the university who are easy to overlook because we only contact them via emails are the administrators. They know the routes of this university and they can point you in all sorts of directions.
Right direction,
Right. And in as much as these exist, I think that the question of funding with proper planning and not rush to a supervisor or an administrator last minute when you need the money, because universities make their budget well in advance. So talking to people, I think, is the starting point, and you can activate and unlock funding potentials that are unimaginable beyond for field work. I mean, there are all sort of
funding opportunities.
As a PhD student, again in the social sciences, you have 500 Swiss francs for, I think, the year or so to support your publishing.
Wow.
So that is money that is there. You entitled
500?
to it. Yes.
Wait, how much is publishing in the social sciences?
It depends on what
The
journal
journal
that you publish with.
Right.
And I mean, an extension of this publishing question is open access. I mean, early this year, I think the University of Basel
had an agreement,
paid for me to publish open access. So I can't even imagine what professors get.
Yep.
And this is an important thing, at least for me, because I think knowledge that we produce should be accessible and not locked behind paywalls. So again, to prove my point that there is money beyond the assumption that Switzerland is rich to fund our activities. And we just have to pay attention, look, ask questions, and we will often be very surprised. And I mean, there are associations that, because of our field, we can apply to. So in my PhD, my work had to do with mining. So there is the Mining History Association that has grants, 1,000 bucks. Every year you can apply. And it's not always so difficult to put things together. Right. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are a lot of opportunities. One ought to
go
check
after them. Great.
Find them and prepare for them. To increase one's chances. And it's not just asking to find where there's, but also talking to people who have previously successfully received these funds and they can help you. And there are, again, in the social sciences, like paid coaching to look for fund. So, there are very many open doors.
Right. And is there something else that you would like to add on, something I may have missed, or something you would like to say before we close?
No, I would say thank you, and everybody else working behind the camera, to make this work, because I'm grateful to be here to say what my life has been like in the past 6 years since I came to Switzerland as a PhD student, and now,
I mean, you've been here for quite a long time.
Yes.
I can imagine how that must have felt. Like, I think we touched onto it earlier, the quote-unquote disconnect from home transitioning into Basel.
So to pick from that, maybe an anecdote to make a final point.
Cool.
So particularly about feeling disconnected. When I moved to Switzerland, I lived in a place very close to Kannenfeld Park. So geographically, it's quite close to the airport where I entered Switzerland from. And apart from struggling with time, because it looked so bright during, late summer. And in my very Ghanaian mind, it was like 6 o'clock and it was 10 o'clock.
I still struggle with that till then.
Where I live, being very close to the airport meant that I often had flights or planes, moving about. And that was very difficult for me to handle for a long time.
Really?
Yes, because I would feel homesick.
Oh, no.
Yes.
That is horrible.
But it is to make the point. I left there not too long.
Wow.
I moved to a different place.
Crazy.
Different story for another day. But to point out that once we choose this path, it is a path of glory when we finish, but it's a path of sacrifice and isolation in reasonable dose is part of that sacrifice. And we have to understand that is what it comes with, that aspiration that we want to accomplish. So it's sweet sometimes. It's not, for different reasons and under different circumstances. But I think that we are more than capable of overcoming what in that moment might seem conditions that are insurmountable.
That is well put. And, finally now, I know I've been saying finally, what would you say to someone who just finished their PhD?
It's a surreal feeling. You have a title that you've been working for years. And it would wash away quite quickly, I'm sorry. Because reality kicks in.
Yeah.
But the best thing that you could walk out of finishing a PhD is a plan.
Okay. I must have a plan. I must start planning now. And thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much I know you're coming from far and you must be tired and all of that, but thank you for making the time, and thank you for engaging with us, and thank you for allowing us to be able to share part of your story. And, it's an honor to have you here, Dr. Ernest.
Pleasure.
Cool. And thank you very much for joining us. To everybody for joining us, if you're watching, thank you for being here, and thank you for engaging. Please comment down below, ask Dr. Ernest some questions if you want him to come back. I personally want him to come back because there's so many other questions I wanted to ask, but I think some may be reserved for another time. And don't forget to comment, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends to subscribe. We are on our road to 100 subscribers. So comment down below what you think about the episode, about the topics. And if you would like to get in contact with Dr. Ernest, just let us know. And is it okay to share your details in the description box? Maybe
email
your LinkedIn, your email. Yeah, great. And we will do that. So from us as Academia Unplugged, bye.